You are listening to Unified Through Chronic and Mental Illness with your hosts, Angie Roberts and Kimberly Murphy. Please be advised that some of the topics of this podcast can be triggering and sensitive in nature.
Approximately 74 children under the age of 14 commit murders every year in the United States, accounting for less than 1% of all homicide perpetrators. About 90% of this demographic are males.
Hey Spoonies, mental health warriors, and our supporters. Welcome to another episode of Unified. I'm Kimberly Murphy here with Angie Roberts.
Hey, y'all.
And today we're talking about a really serious subject. So I want to put a trigger warning out there first. We are going to be talking about homicide. So keep that in mind as you continue to listen. And if that's something that you struggle with, catch us next week and skip this one.
Yeah, because this can be really deep, and if
right.
added some sound bites, and it can be a little scary.
It can be scary. Yeah, especially if you've suffered a loss like that.
Right.
So that stat was really surprising.
I know. 74 children under the age of 14.
Like, that's the age group that I think about when I think about children that are killers. I think of the demographic of under 14. And so I think a lot of people believe after 14, you start to have some of those adult reasonings, which we know they don't. But I think most people believe that they're going into adulthood. But okay, so 74 children under the age of 14 commit murder every year in the United States. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but I feel like that's a lot for that age group.
I would think so.
But yeah.
It's a surprising number for me.
It is for me too. So I know that you did some research on, this particular age group. And what did you find out?
There was a study done at George Washington University, and they found two notable categories among the perpetrators that are 16 and under.
Okay.
A non-empathetic murderer. Children who lack the psychological ability to empathize with other people. Usually they have a history of assault. They develop personality disorders, and they're not able to cope with stress, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And usually they spend their first year without proper parental care or affection.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're going to find out is a big thing.
Right.
Here.
I imagine. Yeah.
And these murderers are likely, in this category anyway, are likely to kill again. Now they
what I'm thinking when you just said that was they usually have a history of assault. So again, like, we're finding a pattern with people, and already I'm going to say it already. There's that pattern with kids too. If you're having a child that's has a history of assault, right there off the bat, there's a problem. Preventative medicine of some sort needed to be done at that point.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you said there's another kind?
Yeah, the sexual identity conflict murders. Sexual identity conflict murders.
Right.
It usually consists of males who are taunted for their female qualities. They will carry a gun due to their physical ability or their lack of physical ability. And they often kill in a moment of passion, and they are very unlikely to kill again. Okay,
so these sound like kids that are just kind of backed into a corner and it's spontaneous and they react.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I'm already thinking of some cases that I've seen. So where they fit into those categories. I wonder if the sexual identity conflict murders are also the type of murders where you find out that the mother was extremely abusive, so they're abusive to girls. So I wonder if that would fit in there too. I think it would.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have to look that up, and we'll let you guys know what we find out when we check that out. I wonder if it's the same. It might be
Right.
too young. They might be too young to be classified that way. I don't know, but
Yeah, it is a slippery slope when they go to classifying these children that are under a certain age.
Right. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about why kids are this way, or what some of the kids have in common, right?
Right. They have a slow autonomic nervous system. So that means they have irregularities in their brain function. Specifically, y'all, I'm having a hard time today. Okay, specifically the frontal and temporal lobes. Those brain regions there are the frontal lobe is responsible for decision making, and the temporal lobe is responsible for processing memories.
Right. And the only issue I have with this is I don't think that a child's brain is fully formed and is really responsible for decision making until they're much older than the group we're talking about.
Right.
But we do learn those things from a young age. So I imagine they're saying that it's really behind or something of that nature, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm not sure, or if just they're so far off from being the age. I think it's 22, or I can't exactly
no, I think
remember,
they raised it recently to 25. They changed it again. So
oh wow.
I know it's going to be 30 before we know it.
We're never adults.
Right? We never get there, guys.
Yeah,
we just let you in on a big secret.
Adult, yeah, once you become an adult, you're like, can I go back now? Okay,
yeah, basically.
Anyway.
Okay, so but they all have things in common.
Yeah. So this is one, the nervous system, or the slow nervous system.
Right.
And then they have, of course, they have lack of anger management skills, which makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And then they're not likely to kill again. There's also various social environmental factors. They may give rise to the development of child murderers in infancy. Notably, like the first 12 months is the most critical stage of development of basic human emotions and brain function.
Right.
So when an infant who doesn't receive the adequate attention and physical touch, they're more susceptible to developing personality disorders in the future. I thought that was very interesting.
It is. Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting for, oh no. Okay. No, Angie, keep going. So I was about to go on the bed sharing tantrum, but I'm not going to do that. We're not talking about that.
It's funny because I was going to say, well, there's a lot of people out there who think letting children cry it out at this age is okay. So we have,
I was going to go.
We have evidence right here, guys. You heard it.
Right. It's really not good if you look at the evidence, but
yeah,
I'm not mommy shaming. So
no, we're not doing that. We're just pointing it out.
So also, I thought this was interesting. A common characteristic of serial killers is that they are often adopted.
Wow.
What do you think about that? Because you are like serial killer guru. So,
that's a question I don't know the answer to. So now I'm going through my head right now, like, was he adopted? Was he adopted? Was he adopted? I'll have to go back. Right. I'll have to go back and check it out. However, I can say that they all share a very distinct cutoff from their families. Like even if their families do things together, they don't have that interpersonal relationship that you would expect a child to have with their parent. So it wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, I'm going to go back and check that out. That's interesting.
I thought it was interesting too. I was
like, There's a case we're going to talk about today where this fits. So, yeah.
So children who feel isolated by society and not their parents, so now we're talking about society, may develop deviant behavior as the child slowly develops like a deep rooted hatred, they said, for other members of the community. And they create fantasies that will enable them to avert their dominance. So they, this is kind of where it gets scary.
I think this sounds like some of the shooters, like definitely Columbine. Yeah.
A lot of the child perpetrators report feeling isolated from their peers, generally due to issues regarding their weight, appearance, or learning disabilities.
Right.
So those children's, the children. I am from the South.
You'll hear made up words every so often. Yep.
Okay, so children who lack the psychological or physical capability to effectively communicate with others may also experience, a growing sense of loneliness.
Right.
And that isolation leads to an increased dependency on their imagination for entertainment, and that may turn violent with time.
That makes sense.
Which kind of scares me because my son has a big imagination.
Well, he doesn't have the other factors, thank goodness. Because one by itself is not going to create a murderer, and even all of them together don't necessarily. But yeah, I think an imagination is usually a good sign.
Right.
And he does have a wonderful imagination. You're absolutely right. He really does. So let's get right to it. We were going to talk about some of the kids that we're obviously introducing their traits about. But now we wanted to pick out a couple of cases so that people could sort of understand, maybe find some similarities in what we've already talked about in some of these cases. So the first one we have is Craig Chandler Price. A lot of people who are true crime followers probably already know this story. And he was known as the Warwick Slasher, and he was arrested for 4 murders. He killed his first victim when he was just 13 years old. And what he did is he broke into her house, which was only a couple houses down from where he lived. And he stabbed a 27-year-old woman living there with a kitchen knife, and he stabbed her 58 times. So that's hard to think about. And then at the age of 15, so think about this, he didn't get caught. So at the age of 15, he brutally stabbed 3 more neighbors. So one of them was a mother, almost 40 years old, and her 2 young daughters. With his first murder that was unsolved, they never figured out who did it. He was able to commit the second crime. And this is a lot of the issues that we're facing in the United States right now, especially with like sex offenders. Like they can get away with so many, it seems like they can get away with so many different crimes until the crime is so unimaginable, then there's no choice but to arrest them and keep them in, getting a life sentence. So here's another example where it wasn't caught, so he was able to commit the second crime. And the similarities in the killings led the police to obviously call the FBI in to investigate a possible serial killer. So this was a big case. And at first he was tying Price to the scene seemed impossible. But then an observant detective noticed a cut on his hand. So when he was arrested, he basically confessed, and he showed no remorse for the killings at all. I haven't heard that confession. Have you heard that confession, Angie?
I have heard the confession. I heard, and I'm going to say that he didn't show remorse, but he didn't sound like some of these serial killers that just don't care. He did sound like he cared. Like, yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if this was the court one or just a confession that he did.
I think they're talking about the initial confession.
Right.
And they said they said he had no remorse, and that he even described the night he was in Heaton's house and how he bit her face as he knifed her. and how he mimicked the final cries of her dying daughters. So maybe that's what they were referring to, is when he was actually doing the crime, he showed no remorse.
It's actually the confession.
Mhm.
It is the confession that I heard,
Right.
and I'll put that up on
Okay.
I'll put that up on the
Facebook
site.
and social media. He was sentenced as a minor, and upon his potential release, bragged he would make history before earning an additional 10 to 25 years for various incidences of criminal behavior while he was in prison.
Yeah, he couldn't behave himself.
Right. And of course, if you're bragging you're going to make history, obviously you're not reformed. So
didn't he try to kill somebody in jail?
I'm
in prison,
I'm
me.
imagining various incidences of criminal behaviors, probably assault, things like that. 10 to 25 years added is a lot of time. So maybe he did kill someone in prison. But this says he'll be in jail until at least 2020. So he was eligible for parole last year, or 2 years ago, sorry. And they said he was 46 at the time. Now, I haven't heard anything about him being released, and I don't expect him to be released, but it's possible.
You never know.
Right. So we also have, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard this story too, and if you haven't, brace yourself. There were two 10-year-old boys, John, I think it's Venables, and Robert Thompson. So these two 10-year-old boys were in a shopping mall, and they came across 3-year-old James Bulger, and this was in 1993. I don't know the exact details. All I know is that the mom said she turned her head for a moment, and next thing you know, these boys lured this 3-year-old away from his mother and walked out of the mall with him. And they had video of these two kids holding his hand and taking him out of the mall. At some point during that capture, they had assaulted him enough so that he had a visible wound on his forehead, and they walked him from a shopping center to a deused railway line where they started torturing him. But all the way there, everybody saw this 3-year-old crying with a visible wound, and these two 10-year-old boys walking this child down the street. If I saw that, I would find that unusual, wouldn't you?
I would find it very unusual. I remember when I was listening to this, there was like 38 people or something like that that saw them.
Exactly. And nobody did anything. So they were successful in getting this toddler secluded in this area. And when they got him there, they began to torture him. They threw paint in his eyes. They kicked and they stomped on him. They threw bricks and stones at him. And then eventually they dropped a 10 kg. What is that? Kilograms. Thank you. Okay. So we don't do kilograms here, do we?
I'll tell you in just a second. Keep going.
All right. So I hope there's people laughing with me out there. So they dropped
American.
Right. So they dropped this iron plate on him, which is, I personally think it was his cause of death. They had no way of really knowing. What they do know is that they laid his body across the tracks and weighed his head down so that he was splayed across the tracks, so that, of course, when the train came, his body would be cut in half with the train. And that's exactly what happened. The pathologist confirmed that the little boy had died before the train hit him. Thank you, God. At least that part, because could you imagine that? I mean, imagine the terror this poor 3-year-old went through anyways. To have that happen as well would be.
He's only 2.
So after all this happened, they were sentenced to serve 15 years. And so that was back in 1993. So I'm very curious to find out what happened to them. You had some information, right?
Yeah, they did get out. And then Venables. He is actually back in prison for child pornography, excuse me.
Wow.
And when they were talking to the investigators, they said that they thought Robert Thompson would be the one that would do something to go back into prison, because The other one was very quiet and good and was really great at, in prison and everything. But he got out and
It's
yeah.
often that way, and it reminds me of a story I saw on a show, Killer Kids, and
Hmm.
his name was Larry Schwartz.
Hmm.
And he was adopted. He was a foster child. He was adopted into a family. And there was another boy who was a foster child as well, who had been in and out of foster homes because people couldn't tolerate his behavior. And he was in the same home. And everybody thought, oh, that kid that had all those problems keeping a home, he's going to be the one to do something. But what
Hmm.
ended up happening is that boy aged out of the system and went on his own way. Uh, and I kind of believe that they kicked him out. But anyway, um,
Wow.
Larry, who was like top student, could do no wrong. He was the prized child of the family. They had to kind of turn against him because there was they were using the other kid as the scapegoat. And so they
Right.
started coming down on him like he couldn't do anything right anymore. And after being treated so well, and then to turn this way, like, for example, they told him he had to get a B on a class or a test or something. He had to get a B. And if he got
Hmm.
it, that he would be allowed to get his driver's license. And so he achieved it. And then they said, well, that's not good enough. You need to get an A. So um, it just became intolerable for him because he was the good kid. And now all of a sudden, the people that made him feel like he was finally part of a family were turning against him. So
Right.
he
Oh, that's
actually,
hard.
I know. And so he actually ended up killing his mom, and then he killed his
His
father.
his real mom or his
Well, there is
adopted?
his adopted mom.
His
He ended
adopted.
up he
Okay.
ended up going into a rage, and this is this quiet, well-behaved kid, and he just goes into a rage and kills his mom and then kills his father. And there was a little girl in the family too who was also adopted. It came out later that she was being sexually abused by the father, and she
Mm.
swears that he did it because he was protecting her. So regardless though of what happened, it was the quiet one. And a lot of people say it's the quiet ones that you got to watch out for. So I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, if you look at a lot of the people who do commit crimes, many of them, people say, well, I would never expect that person to do that. So uh, next we have Joshua Phillips, who is 14 years old. He was playing with a baseball bat at his home in Jacksonville, Florida, when he struck 8-year-old Maddie Clifton in the eye. And so her eye starts to bleed. And basically, Phillips says he panicked. He was
Hmm.
really worried that his father, how his father would react. So he strangled her with a phone cord and stabbed her 11 times. And then,
What?
yeah. And then he had a waterbed. And you remember the waterbeds were like had these pedestals.
Oh yeah.
He hid
Uh-huh.
her body inside the pedestal of his waterbed. And so his mom eventually discovered it a week later. I imagine it didn't smell very well in the house.
Right.
Uh, the autopsy didn't reveal if there was any sexual assault, but her body was found nude from the waist down. That
Oh,
doesn't, yeah, that doesn't always mean assault, though. Sometimes it's a humiliation issue.
right.
Sometimes they want to pose them a certain way. So it's, like they weren't able to tell. And she was probably in water. So that probably got some evidence. I mean, the evidence could have been tampered with and because of the water. I don't really know. I'm not a detective or a CSI person, but being in the water, I'm sure definitely messes with any evidence. But
Yeah.
so anyway, he says he basically did it because his father was extremely abusive. And if he was worried that if he had found out that he hurt Maddie at their house, that his father would just go nuts on him. And Phillips had no history of violence,
Oh
never had done
wow.
anything before. So you kind of wonder if it was an accident because he had no history of violence when this happened. But his fear of his father, he says led him to do this. And he was charged as an adult, um, which I'm not sure. I go back and forth on this, like when should they be charged as an adult or should they ever be charged as an adult? Because they
Right.
can be charged as a juvenile and still get a sentence Like I think we need some reform on that as well. But anyway, he was found guilty of murder in the first degree and he was sentenced to life without possibility of parole.
Yeah, that sounds like a crime of passion, like right out, because
Absolutely.
he
Yeah.
he panicked. So
hmm
that it's interesting that he panicked, but why do people, I don't know.
This is like
He's not
hard to
an adult,
understand.
so
It's hard to understand though, because there are people out there that are probably listening right now saying, you know what, I had abuse in my house and I didn't kill anybody. I didn't do any of this stuff and I wasn't, this way. Uh,
well, thank God you're not.
Obviously, right. Thank God you don't have the mental health issues these kids do, or because I do think an abuse at a really young age can change, the pathology in some people. Uh, we just talked about that, right? And,
Right.
if you have mental illness, it could even be, undiagnosed because there's neglect in the house or whatever. Um, Obviously, I mean, if somebody kills somebody on purpose, I would think that if it's not self-defense, there's got to be a mental illness accompanying that because people just don't kill other people for pleasure unless there's something seriously wrong with them. In
Right.
this case, he didn't do it for pleasure, but to be that afraid of his father, if you're to believe his motive, and that's what his motive was, to be that afraid of his father is just, he must have been severely abused. And I would think that the court would take that into account, but obviously they didn't.
Right. It didn't sound like they did at all.
No. So, I did research a lot of different cases, and a lot of different cases came to mind, of course, and we could talk all day about them. Eric Smith is like a big one because he was just released on parole. We'll be talking about him. He gets a whole podcast of his own because his story is so in depth. So that's
And
one
we're gonna
coming
have a
up.
co-host.
Yes, we are. It's gonna be a great episode. So I hope you guys hang with us so you can hear that. But since Ethan Crumbly, everybody went, oh, okay. Since everyone's talking about Ethan Crumbly, please don't roll your eyes. Or, we really need to talk about this if we're going to talk about killer kids, because this case, I think, kind of sums up every fear that we have about the kids that are being lost to the system and, end up with life in prison when there may be like other factors at play that the court is not necessarily taking into account. I think with Ethan Crumbly, it's a perfect example.
Yes, I think I have a lot to say about Ethan Crumbly.
So
That's what
let's just get into like the basics of it. So
All right.
Ethan Crumbly goes into the school, Oxford High School, and shot as many people as he could. 7 were injured, 4 unfortunately passed away. And so this happens, and we start to hear the story come in about this boy and how he got to this point in his life to where he would shoot up a school.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Poor Ethan. Let's see. Go ahead. I don't know where to start about this.
I know it's hard to figure out where to start. Well, so people probably have heard a lot of this story in the first
Right.
place. What's new about the story, though, is, and it explains a lot about his history, is 3 weeks before he allegedly shot up the school, we have to say allegedly, he brought a bird's head in a mason jar filled with a yellow liquid, and he left it on top of a toilet paper dispenser in the boys' bathroom. And the school knew about it, the school found it, and they kind of dismissed it. And that happened the day before the shooting. He also brought bullets to class and had them on full display. This was in addition to researching ammunition on his cell phone that same day, but he had brought them to school, and school officials knew about the bullets, the suit claims, although with the tweet he posted, he posted on Twitter just a few hours later, "I have now become death, the destroyer of worlds. See you tomorrow, Oxford." Okay, this happened the day before also. There's a lawsuit against the school now, and they're saying that they're accusing officials of failing to report Ethan to protective services. And the principal said he was going to, but it never happened.
Right.
So he also drew a picture of a gun on his math homework, along with the words, "The thoughts won't stop. Please help me."
Yeah, that was the day of,
Yeah. And
wasn't it? Yeah.
Ethan Crumbley also videotaped himself torturing animals at home. He used to text his mom all the time about ghosts and demons in the house. He made Molotov cocktails at home. That's basically, homemade bombs. He drew a sketch of himself shooting up the school in a journal. And he texted a friend and said, "It's time to shoot up a school," JK, which is joking, and hid a bird's head under his bed for 6 months. And that was the bird that he brought to school. But his mom knew about it. And they knew about him killing animals. They knew about all of these other things about he was hearing voices, he was having hallucinations. He would beg his mom to help him. According to the school, someone had dumped a severed deer's head in a school courtyard and scrawled messages in red acrylic paint on the pool deck and the windows. And after that, the parents started complaining to the school principal about threats to students made on social media.
Oh, wow.
They also accused the lawsuit, going back to that, also accuses the school of negligently excluding the school safety liaison officer from a meeting that was held with Ethan Crumbley and his parents on the morning before the shooting, when a teacher found the teen's violent note and the drawing with a handgun. So they had this meeting, and it also accuses two counselors of deliberately deciding against showing that note to the school officer, so the school officer never saw it. His parents, so Ethan gets caught, of course, and his parents go to the bank and withdraw $3,000 of his money, their own money. They had horses, so the mom managed to sell her horse like that day so that they could run. They bought 4 burner phones and took off. Okay, so doesn't that strike you as
I'm
odd?
not
Like,
laughing.
well, I know but I know, right?
I'm
How
really laughing at how
ridiculous
they
is
got
it?
caught.
It's ridiculous. I mean, so it makes you wonder though, how were they so prepared? Why did they run like they were the ones who caused the murder? I really do feel personally that the neglect caused this young boy, and I kind of feel like the parents just let's let him do what he does, and if something happens, okay. Because his mother
I absolutely believe James and Jennifer Crumbley are absolutely responsible for the deaths of the 4 people and everything that happened, because they bought their son a gun.
Yep. I was just going to say they bought it they gave it to him in November. And they said it was an early Christmas present, and the day, I think a couple days before, maybe even the day before, the mom posted something on one of her social media platforms and said, "I'm having mother and son time," and it was a picture of them at the shooting range, and she was teaching him how to shoot a gun.
Right. And I mean,
he was texting his mom when he was home alone, and he would say, "Mom, I think there's a demon or a ghost or someone inside the house," and he was legitimately scared.
Yeah, he also had hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
He suffered from, these are hallucinations, but I don't know if there was other kind of hallucinations or not, because I know
they basically said that he would text her and she would sometimes she wouldn't even respond. It would take her hours to get back to him, and he's like terrified. And they found a video on his phone showing him like torturing animals, like I said. So Jennifer Crumbley knew.
Right.
And ignored all of the signs. I think that they were prepared to run. I think they had a conversation. I think they knew it was possible that this could happen. I think they were tired of their son for whatever, for all of these issues. And rather than get him real help, they just let him go. How can you ignore all of these things?
You're not a very good parent.
Right. Exactly. So there, of course, I mean, if you're following the story, you know that the parents did get arrested.
Yes.
They
got arrested because they parked their car in front of the place they were hiding out at. I'm sorry, dumb criminals.
Yeah. Well, didn't they go to one location and then they went back to where
They
It was
did.
more
They went down
familiar.
south. They
Uh-huh.
went down south and they had an APB out for them. And so they come back up here and they were trying to get they said they were trying to get their affairs in line for um
Jail.
they got arrested. Yeah. You don't get to do that. Sorry.
Well, I see, this is what's suspicious to me, because if one of my children shot up a school, my first reaction would not be to sell everything and run. My first
Right.
reaction would be, I'm sure that I would, just the idea of it makes me want to cry. Like, I would freak out.
Right. Yeah.
And it would be a surprise to me. However, if I had a child that was displaying all of these things, you best believe I would have them in a psychiatric unit getting the care they need until they're safe to themselves and other people. He
Right.
was begging for help. He was begging for
Ethan,
help.
okay, so here's what I think should happen. I have probably a different outlook than most people. I have a little soft spot for Ethan because Ethan was trying to get help. He was begging for help
Mm-hmm.
and no one would help him. And then look what happened.
Right.
This is a very sad case of how mental health can really get violent when it's not taken seriously,
Right.
when it's put off or anything like that. There was so many signs, and we know that killing and torturing animals is a sign
Mm-hmm.
of a psychopath, which is not good. I'm not
Absolutely.
saying he's a psychopath, just saying we
I
know that's
think
the
that
sign.
the circumstances were definitely pushing him.
I think he needs to be into mental health center for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think his mom and dad need to go to prison for the rest of theirs.
I do believe that they're very, very responsible, because
And I think the school needs to pay for not
yeah.
doing what they are supposed to do.
Yeah, this
This could
boy
have been
definitely,
prevented in so many
exactly.
different ways.
Exactly. And, had everyone done their due diligence and cared about this boy, Hannah St. Hannah St. Juliana, who was 14, Madison Baldwin, who was 17, Tate Meyer, who was 16, and Justin Schilling, who was 17, would still be here today.
Right.
Not to mention the other kids who are injured, living with PTSD, who are having all of these problems now because of this situation. And Ethan too, I feel bad for him. I know a lot of people, that's controversial, but think about it. Think about, they found a notebook that was filled with pictures of him with a gun. When it was out for his mom to see, just sitting on a table, she would see him. I imagine him at like the kitchen table doing this stuff, leaving it there.
Right.
Her being there and seeing it and being like, whatever. I can't even imagine what was going on in the house. But his father, knowing all of these things as well, the big picture of everything we just said, decides to go to a gun store and buy him a gun. Why would you do that?
I don't know.
Huh? Yeah. Now,
that blew my mind.
It blew my mind too. And the day before the shooting, the parents resisted taking their son home from school, because they did suggest that he go home for that day, because they had to work. So,
see, I couldn't have been the principal. I'd have been like, I don't care, one of y'all.
Yeah.
I don't care where your kid goes, but guess where he's not staying.
Well, listen to this too. The day before the shooting, his parents were contacted by the school after he was caught searching for the ammunition during class. So he was planning on doing it the day before. She ignored the school's attempts to reach her about the incident, but reportedly texted her son at the time and said, "LOL, I'm not mad at you. You have to learn to not get caught."
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And all the school had done was basically tell them, you need to get your son counseling within 48 hours. And of course, the next day is when he murdered his classmates. They also didn't carry out a search of his backpack or his locker when he was allowed to return to class that day. He could have had his handgun in his backpack during the meeting.
He did have his handgun. The handgun
Did
was
he?
in his
they
backpack
found
during
out
the meeting.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
It was right there.
And then, okay, so he opens fire, and after the news gets out, Jennifer Crumbly texts her son and said, Ethan, don't do it. And then sells her horses, says it's time to get out of Dodge, and they took off. So I feel like that was a text to sort of cover herself. I think we're going to find out that these parents like almost pushed him to do this. I don't understand how any parent could act this way.
They definitely didn't do anything to stop him from doing it. So
yeah. But do you take a kid who says there's demons? Do you take a kid with all these pictures, the kid who's killing animals, to a gun range and buy him his own gun?
No, I take him to the psychiatrist.
Right.
Exactly. And the counselor and the therapist and whatever else we need to go to.
Right. So, and that's why these two have been arrested, and deservedly so. They need to stay in jail, at least for a long time, if not for the full sentence of the murders, because, as far as I'm concerned, they're just as guilty.
They're just being charged with manslaughter, I think.
That's sad. That's sad. Well, yeah. he's being tried as an adult, which I do understand. They requested that he be moved to a juvenile facility so that he could go to school, but the request was denied because they thought he'd be a danger to the other minors.
I'm sorry, but yeah, I couldn't let him go to another school.
Yeah, I think he should be. Well, they're talking about school in juvenile.
Right.
Juvenile prison, yeah, but it's still, they said it's definitely not safe for the other kids, which I understand, but because he shouldn't be there. He should be in a psychiatric hospital, a maximum security type of situation in a psychiatric hospital where he's getting help.
Yes.
Once he has that help, then they can decide what to do with him. But for right now, he's in the wrong place, in my opinion. And didn't he plead this week not guilty?
He pleaded not guilty.
So what do you think is going to happen there? Like, what is the reason for that? Do you think they're going to go with the insanity?
They didn't say, but I don't know. They should. I think they should.
Yeah.
He's definitely was mentally insane. I mean, if you're hallucinating and doing all these kind of things, you're not sane. You're not sane. So,
and I think Ethan falls into the second category of the stuff that you were talking about earlier, that there was the categories of the different types of kids who kill. And I definitely feel like he fits in the second category of, not being socially accepted, being lonely, and then having these parents just kind of nudging him and helping him out. Didn't help either.
Every time I see that kid's picture, I don't know, my heart falls in my stomach for him. And it's always been that way. And I just think that his parents really, they really dropped the ball.
They did. And I don't know if it's because, I know there are people out there who don't believe in mental illness. I know that there's people out there who downplay things because they can't face it. I'm not going to say who this member in my family is, but there's a member in my family who found out that another member in my family, he came out and said, I'm gay and I have a man that I'm in love with. And he was with a guy for 10 years, and this other person in my family said it's still a phase. So there's some people.
It's a phase. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long phase. There are some people that just cannot face the truth, and I'm not sure what it is, but if you're a parent and your child says anything like this, you need to take it seriously to the highest degree, because what if your child is the next one to do this? I'm sure that a lot of kids who have done these things, the parents were absolutely shocked because they turned their heads and they didn't see the signs. But the signs in Ethan's case were blaring. How could you not see them? They were like, yeah, they were not subtle at all. So I feel bad for Ethan. He was definitely, his life was taken from him as well.
Yeah, I feel like that too. It's so sad.
And he's being tortured in his mind. So if anybody feels like he deserves to be in a horrible hell, he is. Having mental illness to that extreme is hell to live with. It cannot feel good. You kind of have to put yourself in that person's shoes. It's got to be scary and it's got to be horrible. A lot of us turn these types of feelings on ourselves when we don't know what to do with them. But in Ethan's case, he cried out, and this was his way of crying out. And these kids do need to be, don't get me wrong, they do need to be where they cannot hurt anybody else. However, in his case, I think the whole thing could have been prevented and he could have had a productive life if somebody had cared about him.
Oh, I think so too. And that's what makes me so sad every time I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I see a baby every time I look at him. I guess it's me getting older, but you know.
I know he does. And he looks very, I would think that he's a boy with very low self-esteem and very lonely. And that's what I see. I see somebody who is just incredibly lonely, and it'll be interesting to see what he's like throughout the trial. I don't know if we're going to get to see anything, but they are releasing some evidence. So maybe we'll get to follow the case a little bit and see what happens to him. I can't wait to do our follow-up podcast on Eric Smith, because now we get to see what is it like when somebody grows up in prison and is released. It's still new that of his release, but it'll be kind of interesting to see how that all unfolds with him, because a lot of arguments right now, there's a lot of arguments right now about, is it appropriate to charge a child as an adult and give them those lengthy sentences? Is it possible that they can actually grow to be someone who, like you said, never kills again? There are kids that just wouldn't kill again if they did have help and were released, right? I mean, that's basically what that's saying. So,
Right.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting, and we're not trying to glorify the violence. I hope it doesn't come off that way. We're trying to understand. And what we're seeing, in my opinion, in common is the neglect, the loneliness, and the abuse.
Yes.
And they all had psychological issues, of course. So when you put all those things together, there's a good chance that something horrible is going to happen.
If you are a parent with an incarcerated child, you can go to www.facebook.com/PWICINC.
Yes.
And that's a support group.
It spells out the parents with incarcerated children.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it is a good support group. Yeah.
Right. And then there's a prison fellowship
Mm-hmm.
at www.prisonfellowship.org/resources/support friends, family of prisoners.
Which is great to have those resources. I know that those resources are harder to find because it's such like, what was the stat we said earlier? How many kids? So the groups might not necessarily be easy to find, but there's two that you guys can use if you need to. And you can also message us at any of our social media platforms. And if you're looking for something, let us know, and we will reach out to the people that we know, and we'll find the answer for you if you're looking for particular help that you can't find in this situation.
Right.
So we'll do what we can to help you. So Angie, what is the mantra for this week? This is going to be a tough one, but I know that you're going to give us some words of wisdom.
I'm going to give you some words of wisdom.
Some words of wisdom.
The children who need the most love will ask for it in the most unloving ways.
That is absolutely true.
It is.
Absolutely true.
It's sad, but true. And we
Right.
see this. I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say this real quick. We see this with the Ethan Crumbly case, that he was not loved. He reached out for help so many times.
He did.
And then what happened? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly. And unlike some of the other cases, he did reach out. Like
he did.
I'm telling you, I follow a lot of true crime, and I'm telling you now, that is not something that you normally see.
Right.
They tend to hide things. So the fact that he was reaching out and actually asking for help, I mean, on his math test, he asked for help. So he knew that he needed help. And so that's what makes this so incredibly sad. And I
Right.
hope people understand that about him, not to take away from the victims, of course.
No.
But maybe we can learn something from this so that it doesn't happen again.
That is what we're supposed to do.
Exactly.
We need to always take away something from.
Exactly. To try to protect the future children.
Very much so.
So we hope that you got something out of this week's episode. And if you did, please share it. Let your friends know, though, that there is sensitive topics being talked about. Again, not everyone is able to hear this, and that's okay. Follow and subscribe to us. We really need your support. It gets our stuff out there so that more people can hear it. And we really do appreciate every like and every subscribe and every follow and every share.
Yes, we do.
All of our social media information will be announced at the end. So if you need that, please hang on a moment. Join us next week for a brand new episode. Let us know how you like our sip and spin. Sip and spin.
I knew she was going to say it.
There's a sip and spin in Vermont. So that's a whole different story, but I keep saying it because, well, it was a laundromat and a bar. Like, who comes up with that idea? So I keep saying sip and spin.
I keep saying sip and spit after the whole, like the whole swish and swallow.
Right. So
medicine,
yeah. So
we don't know what we're doing. Okay. This
Vermont,
is just the
though.
truth.
Come on, Vermont. A laundromat and a bar in the same space. Anyway, so
right.
Sip and Spill. Let us know how you like our segment, Sip and Spill. And, do you want to be on it? Do you want to come talk to us? Does anybody want to be a guest? Reach out to us. We'd love to hear your stories. We'd love to share your stories. Until then, thank you for listening. And please remember that we're stronger together.
Mask up, guys. Peace out.
Unified through chronic and mental illness can be found at anchor.fm/unified. There you can find all social media links as well as other ways to listen.